What if the child you thought was your flesh and blood wasn't? Imagine the weight of that question pressing on your chest in the dead of night. Imagine looking into the eyes of a child the world believes to be your legacy, only to feel the shadow of doubt creeping in. That, according to explosive claims, is exactly the nightmare Prince Harry has been living behind the palace walls. And now, thanks to Tom Bower, the biographer feared by every royal, those whispers have become screams. This is not just another tabloid rumor or a fleeting scandal. This is the story that could tear apart the House of Windsor at its very core. Because when we talk about the monarchy, bloodlines are not just symbolic, they are everything. They determine who wears the crown, who inherits the legacy, and who represents centuries of tradition. And yet here we are, staring down the possibility that Archie Harrison, the boy the world welcomed with flashing cameras and royal pomp, may not actually be Harry's son. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's rewind. When Meghan Markle and Prince Harry introduced Archie to the world, something felt different. The traditional hospital steps photo op never happened. Instead, Meghan gave birth at the Portland Hospital in London, behind layers of secrecy. No doctors from the royal household staff were officially present, a major break from royal tradition. The first photos of Archie were tightly controlled, almost clinical. The British public, used to seeing royal babies swaddled in white outside St. Mary's with proud parents waving, was left suspicious. Why so much secrecy? Why so many diversions from tradition? Was it just Meghan wanting privacy, or was there more to hide? Now think about this. Royal births aren't just about family milestones. They're matters of state, line of succession, constitutional stability, public trust. All hinge on the unquestioned legitimacy of royal children. That's why even in the 1900s, government officials were required to witness royal births to confirm everything was legitimate. Yet with Archie, those centuries-old safeguards were bypassed. Why? Tom Bower, a man with a reputation for pulling skeletons from gilded closets, stepped forward with a claim so explosive that even his critics struggled to dismiss it. According to his sources, Harry was pressured, by none other than King Charles, to undergo a private DNA test. Not in the glare of publicity, not through official channels, but behind closed doors. A test designed to settle whispers that refused to die. And when the results came back, if Bower's claims are true, they shattered Harry's world. Let's pause here. Put yourself in Harry's shoes. For years, he's been the spare, the outsider, the one constantly compared unfavorably to William. Then Meghan sweeps in, and for the first time, Harry feels like he's found his own family, his escape from the firm's grip. Archie isn't just his son. He's proof that Harry can build a new legacy on his own terms. Now imagine someone telling you, your father, the king no less, that Archie isn't yours. Would you rage? Would you deny it? Or would you take that test, praying the whispers were wrong? And why now? Why does this matter today? Because Tom Bower has raised the stakes in a way that can't be ignored. If Archie isn't Harry's biological son, the entire narrative Meghan and Harry have spun since Megxit crumbles. Their multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify, their branding as a modern family breaking free from tradition. Suddenly it all looks like a carefully curated illusion. And if Bower's allegations prove true, Harry faces not just personal devastation, but public humiliation on a global scale. This isn't the first time legitimacy has threatened the monarchy. Think about the scandals of Edward VIII, whose love for Wallis Simpson nearly broke the crown, or the whispers about Queen Victoria's descendants. History has taught us one lesson over and over. When questions of blood arise, thrones tremble. And now Harry's world is trembling. The British public has long held a fascination with royal paternity scandals. The rumors about Harry himself, that Charles might not be his father, have circulated for decades, fueled by photos comparing him to James Hewitt, Princess Diana's former lover. Harry grew up under that cloud, forced to defend his identity at every turn. Now, cruelly, he finds himself on the other side of the same rumor mill, with his own child's paternity questioned. Irony doesn't even begin to cover it. But this isn't just about Harry. This is about Meghan. If the DNA test really didn't match, what does that say about her? Was this a deception, a carefully orchestrated plan to secure her place in history? Or was there another explanation? Something darker, perhaps, involving decisions made long before Harry ever entered the picture. Audiences worldwide are asking, could the Duchess of Sussex have fooled the very institution she married into? Could she have placed Harry, and the monarchy itself, in a position where the truth, if revealed, would be catastrophic? Now consider this. Tom Bower is not a man who deals in half-truths. His books on Boris Johnson, Richard Branson, and even members of the royal family have toppled reputations and sold millions. When he speaks, people listen, even if they hate what they hear. And Bower claims that the royals themselves are terrified of what he knows. Why terrified? Because this scandal, if proven true, doesn't just touch Harry and Meghan. It destabilizes the monarchy at a time when Charles is fighting for credibility as king. It calls into question the succession, the very future of the crown. And it paints the Windsors not as a family bound by duty, but as a dynasty built on lies, betrayal, and secrets. Do you see now why this story matters? Why it's not just another headline? Because at its heart, this is about legacy. About whether the monarchy, already battered by scandal, can survive another earthquake. About whether Harry, once the cheeky prince beloved by the public, can recover from a betrayal that strikes at his very identity. And so we're left with one burning question. What did that DNA test really reveal? Did it confirm Harry's worst fears? Did it expose Meghan in a way she never anticipated? Or is there another twist still lurking in the shadows? One thing is certain. The truth, whatever it may be, will change everything. And no one, neither the palace, nor Harry, nor Meghan, will escape unscathed. But here's the kicker. Tom Bower hasn't just hinted at a mismatch. He suggested that the identity of Archie's real father is not a mystery at all. That there are names, whispers, and connections pointing in a very specific direction. And if he's right, the scandal we've just laid out is only the beginning. Because the real shock isn't just that Harry might not be Archie's biological father. It's who the real father might be. And that, dear viewers, is where the story takes a turn no one saw coming. It all began with whispers in the palace corridors. Faint at first, almost laughable, like the idle chatter of staff with nothing better to do. But whispers, as history has shown, have a way of becoming storms when the stakes are royal blood. And in the case of Archie Harrison, those whispers would ignite a fire that Tom Bower himself would later pour gasoline upon. From the very moment Meghan Markle announced her pregnancy, things felt different. The palace usually thrives on routine, on rituals honed over centuries. Everything is scripted, predictable, orchestrated to assure the public that continuity is unshaken. But Meghan disrupted that rhythm in ways that startled even seasoned courtiers. The first jolt came with the secrecy. Royal pregnancies are typically shared with the public at carefully chosen moments, sometimes even confirmed by doctors linked to the crown. Yet with Meghan, there were delays, odd silences, and mixed signals. Photos of her cradling her bump fueled speculation. Some swore the bump seemed to change size from one day to the next. Others noted her insistence on being different and private, which in royal terms is code for breaking protocol. By the time Archie was born, the situation had already escalated. Traditionally, royal babies are born at the Lindo wing of St. Mary's Hospital in London. Crowds gather. Cameras roll. Proud parents present the baby on the hospital steps just hours later, setting history in motion with that famous tableau. But Meghan refused. She opted instead for Portland Hospital, a private clinic favored by celebrities but far outside royal precedent. The palace tried to spin this as a personal choice. But insiders knew it was more than that. Why did Meghan avoid the Lindo wing? Why keep away from the cameras and the staff who had delivered William, Harry George, and Charlotte? What was she afraid of? Or more chillingly, what was she trying to hide? When Archie was finally introduced to the public, even the images seemed off. Unlike William and Kate's joyful presentations, Meghan and Harry's photo call felt staged, sterile, almost cold. The baby was swaddled tightly, his face partially obscured. Meghan clutched him awkwardly. Harry hovered nervously, and the whole scene seemed designed to raise more questions than answers. And then came the birth certificate. A document that should have put rumors to rest instead did the opposite. Odd details. Changes made after the fact. Names adjusted. The kind of inconsistencies that pour fuel on conspiracy theories rather than extinguish them. The British press noted the anomalies. and once again whispers began to swirl. Whispers of secrecy, whispers of surrogacy, whispers that Archie's arrival had not followed the traditions, or even the biological reality that the palace wanted the world to believe. Now imagine being Prince Harry in that moment. He had spent his entire life battling whispers about himself. Was Charles truly his father? Was James Hewitt, Diana's red-haired lover, the man behind Harry's striking ginger locks? Harry had endured endless jokes, cruel speculation, even shouted insults from the press. He had fought to convince himself and the world that he was his father's son. And now, just as he thought he had escaped those shadows, the same cruel questions were being asked about his own child. History, it seemed, was repeating itself with brutal irony. But the difference this time was the stakes. Because if Archie wasn't Harry's son, it wasn't just a family matter. It was a crisis for the monarchy. Bloodlines matter in the House of Windsor. They're the foundation of power, the guarantee of succession, the story told to a nation about who rules and why. A break in that line, a scandal of illegitimacy, isn't just embarrassing. It's destabilizing. And that's when Charles stepped in. According to Bauer's account, the king, then Prince of Wales, was quietly but deeply disturbed. For a man who has waited his entire life to sit on the throne, the stability of the crown matters above all. He could not ignore the whispers. He could not risk the monarchy's future being tethered to uncertainty. And so, behind closed doors, Charles confronted his son. Picture the scene. A father and son, already estranged, already scarred by years of tension. Harry, fiercely protective of Meghan, still seething from perceived slights by his family. Charles, aloof, pragmatic, desperate to keep the monarchy's ship from sinking. The air thick with unspoken history. The pain of Diana's absence. The wounds of Harry's rebellion. And then the demand, a DNA test. For Harry, it must have felt like betrayal of the highest order. To be asked to prove his own fatherhood. To have his loyalty questioned by the very family that had doubted him his entire life. Imagine the rage boiling inside him. Imagine Meghan's reaction, fueling the fire, urging him to resist. And yet, the crown's pressure was immense. The whispers wouldn't die. The world was watching. In the end, Harry agreed. Reluctantly, bitterly, but he agreed. The logistics were arranged with absolute secrecy. Trusted doctors. A lab far from prying eyes. Even the palace staff, notorious for leaking tidbits to the press, were kept out of the loop. The fewer who knew, the safer the secret. And so the test was taken. Swabs collected. Samples secured. The evidence locked away in sterile containers, destined to answer the question that had haunted the corridors of Buckingham Palace. Days turned to weeks. Tension mounted. Harry waited, torn between fear and hope. Did he really want to know? Did he want the whispers silenced? Or did he dread the truth that silence might conceal? And then came the envelope. Plain, clinical, heavy with destiny. Inside, a single piece of paper that could unravel his world. Harry's hands must have trembled as he tore it open, his eyes scanning the words. And in that instant, according to Bauer, his heart sank. The test didn't match. The whispers weren't just idle gossip anymore. They had been given form, substance, scientific confirmation. Archie Harrison, the boy Harry had cradled, the boy the world had celebrated, was not his biological son. And if that was true, then everything Harry thought he knew about his marriage, his family, his legacy, was a lie. But this revelation was only the beginning. Because one question now burned hotter than all the others. If Harry wasn't the father, then who was? And that, my friends, was the secret that Tom Bauer hinted at. The secret that terrified the royals more than anything else. Because naming the real father would unleash a scandal so explosive it could rock the monarchy to its core. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Tom Bauer. The name alone sends shivers down the spines of the powerful. For decades, he has been the man who digs where others won't, who asks the questions others are too afraid to put on paper. To celebrities, politicians, and especially the royal family, Bauer is not just a writer. He is a predator, circling quietly, watching carefully, and then striking with words so sharp they cut reputations to ribbons. So when his name began to be whispered alongside Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and the question of Archie's true parentage, everyone inside the palace knew one thing. Danger was coming. Bauer's reputation was forged in fire. He is not a sycophant. He does not flatter or fawn. He exposes. His books on figures like Richard Branson, Boris Johnson, and even members of the royal family themselves have one common thread: discomfort. He thrives on making those in power squirm. And unlike the gossip columns, unlike the fleeting chatter of tabloids, his work is meticulous, well-sourced, and damning. That's why when Tom Bower trains his gaze on you, you don't dismiss it as rumor. You prepare for war. And Meghan Markle knew she was a target long before his words hit the shelves. From the moment she stepped into the royal spotlight, Bower saw a story unlike any other. A woman from Hollywood, divorced, ambitious, entering a family that represents tradition, continuity, and centuries of rigid hierarchy. Meghan was not a puzzle piece that fit. She was the hammer that cracked the picture frame. And Bower, seasoned as he was, sensed the chaos long before the public did. But it wasn't just Meghan's clash with tradition that intrigued him. It was the contradictions. Meghan the humanitarian, Meghan the actress, Meghan the duchess, Meghan the victim. Her narratives shifted depending on the audience. Her past was dotted with friends who were discarded, relatives left behind, and stories that never seemed to line up perfectly. Bower knew that where contradictions live, secrets often hide. And one secret, more explosive than all the rest, lay buried in the question of Archie's birth. Pause for a moment and ask yourself this. If you were Meghan, would you fear Tom Bower? If you had constructed your life story carefully, polished every corner for maximum shine, would you not dread the man whose career is built on finding cracks and forcing them open? It's said that when Bower first began asking questions about Meghan's life, she tried to control the narrative. Allies were instructed to speak only what she approved. Friends were warned not to cooperate. Legal threats loomed in the air like storm clouds. But Bower's genius is in persistence. If one door slams, he doesn't retreat. He knocks on 10 others. Staffers, neighbors, schoolmates, colleagues. His sources aren't always the famous names. They're the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones with stories no one thought to ask. And slowly, piece by piece, he built his picture. And then he dropped the bombshell. Whispers that Harry had been pressed into a private DNA test. That under Charles's quiet but firm insistence, Harry's paternity of Archie had been called into question. Think about that for a second. It's one thing for tabloids to speculate. It's another for a respected, battle-hardened biographer like Bower to put his reputation on the line by suggesting such a thing. The royals know this. They understand the difference between tabloid fodder and Bower's revelations. And that's why panic set in. Because if Tom Bower was circling this story, it meant the whispers weren't just whispers anymore. They were becoming documented, sourced, and dangerously close to being carved into history. What makes Bower terrifying to the royals is not just his relentlessness, but his timing. He releases when the iron is hot, when the subject is already vulnerable. Meghan and Harry had just begun to craft their post-royal brand. Netflix deals, Spotify podcasts, glossy magazine features. They needed stability. They needed the world to believe in the fairy tale of their freedom. And right when they thought they were in control, Bower appeared with his scalpel. Do you see the brilliance of his strategy? He doesn't just tell a story. He dismantles the narrative his subjects have built. He doesn't just reveal secrets. He weaponizes them in ways that force the world to re-examine everything it thought it knew. So what, exactly, did Bower suggest? That Harry's trust in Meghan had been shaken to its core. That the paternity of Archie was not beyond question. That Charles, fearful of another royal scandal overshadowing his reign, had insisted Harry undergo the ultimate test of truth. And most damning of all, that the results left Harry stunned. Now, let's consider why this matters beyond gossip. The monarchy rests on image, on tradition, on the idea that the bloodline is sacred, unquestioned, eternal. A paternity scandal doesn't just embarrass, it undermines the very institution itself. If Archie's legitimacy is in doubt, then the monarchy's line of succession is thrown into chaos. Imagine the chaos of questions. Who truly belongs? Who has a right to the crown? And what does it say about a monarchy already battered by scandal after scandal? And that's where Bower's skill becomes clear. He doesn't just reveal facts. He frames them in ways that expose vulnerabilities. By suggesting Archie's paternity was in doubt, he wasn't just attacking Meghan. He was shaking the monarchy itself, a move far bolder and more consequential than any tabloid headline. Now, ask yourself, why does Tom Bower risk so much? Why take on the royals, knowing the backlash, the denials, the fury that would follow? Because to Bower, truth is power. And because, according to him, the royals themselves are terrified of truth escaping. One insider whispered to Bower that the DNA test was a private humiliation, something never meant to see the light of day. For Charles, it was supposed to be reassurance. For Harry, it was supposed to silence whispers. But instead, it became a loaded gun in the hands of a writer who knew how to pull the trigger. And here's the irony. For years, Harry has spoken about truth, about transparency, about living authentically. But when it came to Archie, if Bower's claims are right, Harry himself was forced into the very secrecy he once condemned. Now picture this. Meghan, pacing in Montecito, furious at the thought of Bower prying open her life. Harry, torn between loyalty to his wife and the fear that the truth he once tried to bury is about to explode across every newspaper in the world. Charles, quietly seething, worried not just about scandal but about history itself. This isn't just a family squabble. It's a royal war with Bower's pen as the most dangerous weapon. But the question remains, if Bower was bold enough to expose the DNA test, was he also bold enough to hint at the one thing even more dangerous? The identity of Archie's true father. Because make no mistake, once you strip away the denials, the defenses, and the carefully crafted PR, one terrifying question looms like a storm cloud over the monarchy. If Harry is not Archie's father, then who is? And Bower, with his relentless pursuit, was closer to naming that name than anyone else dared. But just when the palace thought they could manage the storm, Harry himself made a decision that would turn whispers into a nightmare. Because under Charles's pressure, he agreed to the unthinkable, and the envelope that arrived would change everything. Picture the scene. A thick oak door closes with a muffled thud inside Clarence's house. The air is heavy, suffocating even, with the faint tick of a clock echoing through the silence. Prince Harry, restless, paces the carpet, running his hands through his ginger hair, his jaw tight with anger. Across from him, Charles sits stiffly, his back straight, his hands clasped, the weight of the crown, both present and future, pressing invisibly upon his shoulders. What unfolds in that room, if Tom Bower's account is to be believed, was one of the most painful confrontations between father and son in modern royal history. Charles had heard the whispers long before the public did. He was no stranger to gossip. He'd lived with it his entire life. The cruel speculation about Diana, the questions about Harry's own paternity, thanks to Diana's affair with James Hewitt. But this was different. This was not about Charles's pride. It was about the survival of the monarchy itself. The whispers about Archie weren't fading. They were growing louder, more insistent, more dangerous. And Charles, pragmatic to his core, knew they couldn't be ignored. But how do you tell your son? The boy who lost his mother so young, the boy who always felt like the outsider, that you don't believe his child is truly his? The tension was volcanic. Harry was already fragile. His relationship with Meghan had shifted him from being a royal favorite to a divisive figure, a man who had chosen love over duty, America over England. His bonds with William were frayed, his ties to the institution cut thinner with every passing day. And now, his father, cold, dutiful Charles, was about to demand the unthinkable, proof of Archie's paternity. Imagine being Harry. For years he had fought against the narrative that he was illegitimate. He had endured relentless tabloid comparisons to James Hewitt, the whispers that Diana's affair explained his flaming hair and cheeky spirit. Harry had spent his life proving he belonged. And now his own father was repeating the cycle, casting doubt, suggesting that he was the one whose child might not belong. Charles, for his part, tried to couch it in duty. It is not about you, my dear boy. It is about the crown, about the stability of the family. But to Harry, it sounded like betrayal. To Harry, it sounded like the same coldness that had defined his childhood, the same inability of his father to give comfort when comfort was most needed. Their words clashed like swords. Harry, fiery, defensive, accusing Charles of undermining his marriage, his family, his manhood. Charles, stern, resolute, reminding Harry that the monarchy could not afford uncertainty. The irony cut deep. Harry, who had grown up under a cloud of speculation about his own father, now found himself accused of fatherhood doubts with his own son. History was not just repeating itself, it was mocking him. At one point, according to whispers, Harry slammed his hand down on the table. His voice cracked as he shouted, "How dare you question me? How dare you question Archie?" His face flushed with rage, his chest heaving, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. Charles did not flinch. He had been hardened by decades of scandal, by Camilla's shadow, by the loss of Diana, by the relentless scrutiny of the press. He knew that sentiment had no place in monarchy. Duty was duty. And so, with a steady tone, he repeated the demand. The test must be done. Harry stormed, cursed, threatened to leave the room. He imagined Meghan's face when he told her, her fury, her accusations that the royal family would never accept her, never accept their son. He imagined the tabloids' screaming headlines, the humiliation of a secret becoming public. And yet, deep inside, he knew what terrified him most. What if Charles was right? What if the whispers weren't baseless? What if Archie truly wasn't his? The thought clawed at Harry's mind, digging into wounds he had tried to bury. Could Meghan have betrayed him? Had he been so blinded by love that he hadn't seen the truth? Every time he thought of Meghan's charm, her ability to bend narratives, her history of cutting off people who got in her way, the unease grew stronger. But loyalty was Harry's curse. He had defended Meghan against the press, against his brother, against the institution itself. To question her now would be to admit that everyone else had been right. That thought was unbearable. And yet, the demand from Charles hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Undeniable, choking, inescapable. Eventually, Harry stopped pacing. His hands clenched into fists at his side. His face, pale and drawn, betrayed the war raging inside him. He turned to his father, his voice low, shaking, but final. "If this is what it takes, then fine. But don't expect me to forgive you for this." Charles closed his eyes briefly, as if exhaling centuries of royal duty through his lungs. The decision was made. The test would be taken. For Charles, it was a victory of necessity. For Harry, it was the shattering of trust between father and son, a wound that would fester long after the test itself was complete. And outside that oak door, the palace staff tiptoed, the whispers grew louder, and the crown itself trembled under the weight of secrets too dangerous to contain. Because now, the die had been cast. The test was coming, and the truth it revealed would change everything, not just for Harry, but for the monarchy itself. But what Harry didn't know, as he stormed out of Clarence's house that day, was that the true betrayal hadn't even happened yet. Because the test wasn't just about results. It was about control. And those who held the truth in their hands were about to decide Harry's fate in ways he could never have imagined. And when the envelope was finally opened, the words inside would pierce Harry's heart like a dagger. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The test. The word itself carried more weight than any royal decree, more dread than any paparazzi headline. A DNA test, demanded by the heir to the throne, whispered about in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, and carried out in total secrecy. For Prince Harry, it was not just science, it was judgment. For King Charles, it was not just proof, it was insurance. And for Meghan Markle, it was the single greatest threat to the carefully curated image she had built brick by brick. Arranging such a test within the confines of the monarchy was no simple task. The palace had endured scandals before, but never one that cut so close to the heart of bloodline legitimacy. It had to be done quietly, with surgical precision. Trusted doctors were discreetly contacted, sworn to secrecy, their names stripped from official paperwork. Samples had to be taken, transported, and tested in a lab that could be trusted to remain silent. For Harry, the process was suffocating. Imagine the humiliation. Submitting your DNA not for ancestry curiosity, not for medical reasons, but to prove that the son you cradled in your arms was really yours. Imagine the sterile cotton swabs brushing the inside of your cheek, the cold hands of a doctor avoiding eye contact, the clink of containers as they were sealed. Every sound became a reminder that his family did not trust him, that his wife was under suspicion, that his son's very existence had become a royal investigation. And it wasn't just Harry who had to provide a sample. Archie's DNA was needed too. How does one even begin to explain that? Meghan, fiery, protective, must have bristled with fury at the suggestion. Did she resist? Did she argue? Or did she comply with a cold, tight-lipped silence, knowing that refusal would only fuel suspicion? The samples were collected. Archie's tiny contribution swabbed with tender care, Harry's trembling hands holding back the tide of fear. The containers were sealed in sterile envelopes, coded and anonymous, as if anonymity could hide the gravity of what they contained. And then they were sent away, vanishing into the labyrinth of labs and scientists who would reduce Harry's entire world to a series of numbers and percentages. Days passed, days that must have stretched like years. Harry, restless, anxious, snapping at Meghan one moment, clinging to her the next. Meghan, outwardly calm, but behind the veil perhaps calculating every possible outcome, every strategy to control the narrative. What if the results confirmed Harry as the father? She would be vindicated, free to attack the palace for doubting her, for humiliating her husband. But what if they didn't? What if the test revealed the very truth she had fought so hard to bury? The palace itself was on edge. Staffers whispered in corners. Aides avoided Harry's gaze. Everyone pretended not to know, yet everyone knew something was happening. For Charles, the waiting was agony. He needed certainty. The monarchy needed certainty. And certainty lay sealed in a laboratory envelope. Think about this. DNA, the building blocks of life, is unflinching. It does not lie. It does not bend to power, money, or influence. It is the one truth that cannot be rewritten by palace press releases or glossy Netflix documentaries. And that is what made this test so terrifying. Now put yourself in Harry's place. Every time Archie smiled, every time his tiny fingers curled around Harry's, the doubt screamed louder. What if the bond he felt was built on a lie? What if every ounce of love he had poured into his son was a cruel trick of circumstance? Did he dare even look at Meghan without suspicion gnawing at him? Did he replay in his mind every moment of their relationship, every unexplained trip, every odd gap in her past? The days dragged. The results loomed like a shadow neither Harry nor Meghan could escape. And then, one morning, it arrived. The envelope, plain, unmarked, delivered by hand to Charles's private office. It could have contained a shopping list for all its simplicity, but its contents carried the weight of dynasties. Charles did not open it immediately. He stared at it first, his hands motionless, his mind racing through every possible outcome. If it confirmed Harry, the whispers would finally be silenced. If it didn't, then the monarchy was in peril. Harry was summoned. The atmosphere was suffocating. Meghan, perhaps deliberately excluded, left pacing the halls, her phone buzzing with frantic texts to confidants in California. Harry sat across from his father, the envelope between them like a live grenade. Neither moved at first. Finally, Charles slid it across the table, his expression unreadable. "Do you want to do it?" he asked. Harry's fingers shook as he tore it open. His eyes darted across the page, searching for the words that could save him or destroy him. And there it was, the words that froze his heart, the numbers that confirmed his deepest fear, the percentages that spelled out one thing with brutal clarity. The DNA did not match. Harry's world collapsed in that instant. The room spun, his throat closed, his chest tightened as if the walls themselves were crushing him. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. His son, his Archie, the boy he had sworn to protect from the press, from the firm, from the cruelty of the world, suddenly, biologically, wasn't his at all. Charles, ever the pragmatist, said nothing at first. His face betrayed little emotion, though his mind must have been racing. For the king in waiting, this was confirmation of what he had feared, and perhaps what he had expected. But for Harry, it was devastation. Imagine the rage boiling inside him. Rage at Meghan, rage at his father for demanding this test, rage at himself for agreeing to it. He felt betrayed, humiliated, stripped bare in the most personal way a man can be. His son wasn't his son. His marriage, was it built on a lie? His future, was it crumbling before his eyes? But even in the haze of devastation, another question began to form, one that clawed at him relentlessly, refusing to let go. If Archie wasn't his, then whose was he? And that was the secret no test result could answer. That was the mystery that would haunt Harry in every quiet moment. That was the truth Tom Bower suggested the palace feared most. Because the real father's identity, if revealed, wouldn't just shatter Harry. It could blow the monarchy itself to pieces. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The envelope still lay on the table, its thin sheet of paper inside suddenly heavier than a mountain. Harry's eyes were locked on the words, reading them again and again as though repetition might somehow change their meaning. His hands trembled, his knuckles white, the paper crumpling slightly under his grip. He blinked rapidly, his lips parted, but no sound came. For a man who had faced battlefields, endured relentless paparazzi, and buried his own mother under the glare of billions, this was the moment that broke him. The truth was unbearable. The numbers on that page had spoken in cold, clinical certainty. Archie was not his biological son. At first, Harry laughed, a hollow, bitter laugh that shocked even himself. "This is a mistake," he muttered, shaking his head violently. "It has to be. These things get mixed up, don't they? Samples, labs, they make errors." He looked up at Charles, desperate, pleading for a denial, for comfort, for some reassurance that this wasn't real. But Charles's face was a mask of royal stoicism, his silence confirming what Harry already knew in his heart. Harry's mind raced, stumbling through denial. "We'll do another one," he insisted, his voice growing frantic. "We'll do it again. Different lab. This one's wrong. It has to be wrong." He pushed the paper back toward Charles as though rejecting it could erase its reality. But Charles didn't move. He simply regarded his son with weary eyes, the burden of monarchy etched deep into his features. The denial gave way to rage. Harry's fist slammed against the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the quiet room. "How could you?" he roared, not at Charles, not entirely at Meghan, but at the universe itself. His face turned crimson, veins bulging at his temples, his body shaking with fury. "How dare you question me, force me into this, and then tell me I'm not?" His words choked off, swallowed by the sob lodged in his throat. Charles finally spoke, his voice steady but cold. "It is better that we know, Harry. The crown cannot live under whispers." Those words pierced Harry's soul like a blade. Better that we know. Not better for you, not better for your family, but better for the crown. In that moment, Harry realized his father's priority had never been his pain, his marriage, his child. It had been the monarchy. Always the monarchy. Tears blurred his vision. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping back with a screech, and paced the room like a caged animal. His breath came in ragged bursts, his chest heaving as though he'd run miles. Every memory of Meghan flooded his mind. Her smile, her whispered promises, her reassurances that Archie was his. Had it all been a lie? Had he been duped, played like a fool before the entire world? The humiliation was suffocating. Harry imagined the tabloids, the same ones he despised, salivating over the revelation. The cruel headlines, "Not Harry's son. Archie scandal rocks royals." He imagined William's knowing stare, Kate's quiet judgment, the smirks of courtiers who had never accepted Meghan. The shame was unbearable. But beneath the humiliation was something far darker. Heartbreak. Harry loved Archie. From the first moment he held him, tiny and fragile, he had felt a bond stronger than any bloodline. He had promised himself he would never let Archie endure what he had endured. The loss, the isolation, the cruelty of growing up in Diana's shadow. And now, a piece of paper threatened to rip that bond apart. Was he supposed to stop loving Archie? Was he supposed to see him as less than his son? No. Harry whispered fiercely, his voice breaking. "He is mine. I don't care what that says. He is mine." He repeated the words like a mantra, as if saying them enough times could make them true again. Charles sighed, weary, and spoke with chilling finality. "You may feel that way, Harry, but the truth is the truth, and the truth will out." Harry spun on his father, eyes blazing. "Truth? You want truth? The truth is you've never cared about me, only the institution. And now you want to take my son from me, reduce him to a scandal, a liability." His voice cracked. "You'll destroy him the way you destroyed me." The room fell silent. Harry's words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and undeniable. Charles didn't respond. Perhaps he couldn't. Perhaps even he knew the cost of what had just been uncovered. Harry staggered back, collapsing into the chair, burying his face in his hands. The sobs came then, raw, guttural, unrestrained. Not the dignified tears of a prince, but the broken cries of a man shattered to his core. And yet, Even in his grief, the question gnawed at him. If Archie wasn't his, then who was the father? The thought was unbearable, yet impossible to silence. Names flashed through his mind. Faces from Meghan's past, connections she had kept vague, friendships she had clung to long before he entered the picture. Did she know all along? Had she chosen him as a cover, a convenient prince to elevate her child into royalty? Every glance Meghan had given him suddenly felt suspect. Every smile, every whispered, "I love you," twisted into potential lies. Harry's world, once so certain, was crumbling piece by piece. But denial lingered still, clinging like a stubborn flame. "I need another test," he muttered again, quieter now, almost to himself. "This one's wrong. It has to be wrong." His words were desperate, hollow, but he clung to them as the last thread, keeping him from falling into the abyss. Charles rose, placing a hand briefly on the table, his knuckles pale. "Do as why." And then he left, the door closing with a soft click that felt louder than a cannon blast. Harry was alone. Alone with the paper, alone with the truth, alone with the crushing realization that his life had changed forever. But as he sat there, broken, one thought struck him with chilling force. If Charles knew the truth now, how long before the world did? Because once secrets this explosive begin to seep out, they do not stay hidden for long. And Harry would soon learn that the greatest betrayal was still to come. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Speculation spreads like wildfire in the royal world. One spark, one whispered comment, one unexplained detail, and suddenly the flames leap from palace corridors to the pages of tabloids, across oceans, onto breakfast tables in every corner of the globe. And when word began to slip that a DNA test had rocked Prince Harry's private life, the wildfire was unstoppable. The first whispers came from staff. Staff always know more than they say. Nannies, aides, drivers, the invisible eyes and ears of royal households who see what isn't meant to be seen. They noticed tension, the way Harry snapped at Meghan in hushed tones, the late-night arguments behind closed doors, the sudden tightening of security around documents and doctors. They didn't need the whole story. They sensed something was wrong. And that was enough. Soon, speculation bled into the press. Headlines were careful at first, couched in sources say and insiders whisper. Questions about Archie's birth certificate resurfaced. Old suspicions about Meghan's tightly controlled pregnancy re-emerged. Commentators wondered aloud why no senior royal doctors had attended Archie's delivery. The secrecy, once dismissed as Meghan's desire for privacy, now looked like evidence of something deeper, darker. And then came the question on everyone's lips, the one Harry dreaded most. If Archie wasn't Harry's son, then who was the father? Names began to swirl like leaves in a storm. Some pointed to Meghan's past relationships, men she had dated in her Hollywood years, faces now dug up from old photographs. Others turned their gaze toward her inner circle, the powerful friends who had stood beside her long before Harry entered the picture. Every man who had once been close to Meghan was suddenly a suspect in the court of public opinion. The speculation wasn't just cruel, it was relentless. Social media buzzed with theories, some absurd, some disturbingly plausible. Every detail of Archie's features was dissected. His nose, his hair, the shape of his eyes, were they Harry's? Or did they match someone else's? Millions of strangers became amateur detectives, convinced they could solve the riddle with nothing more than side-by-side photos. But beneath the noise, certain whispers carried weight. Whispers about men connected not just to Meghan's past, but to her present. Whispers that some names kept coming up again and again in conversations among staff, journalists, and palace insiders. One name in particular, a man tied to Meghan's circle, a man whose closeness to her had always raised eyebrows, a man the royals already distrusted. The whispers grew louder. Could he be Archie's true father? Harry, meanwhile, was unraveling. Every rumor cut deeper, every headline a fresh wound. He could feel the world closing in, suffocating him with speculation he could neither confirm nor deny. He wanted to protect Archie, shield him from the cruelty of the world. But how do you protect a child when the very question of his parentage is the weapon being used against you? And Meghan, what of Meghan? Publicly, she smiled, posed for photographs, continued her work as though nothing were wrong. But behind the scenes, insiders claimed she was furious, lashing out at anyone who dared question her narrative. Legal threats were drafted, lawyers consulted. She insisted the rumors were baseless, fueled by racism, sexism, and hatred of her. But her calm exterior could not mask the panic in private moments. Because Meghan knew, perhaps better than anyone, that once a question like this takes hold, it never truly dies. Think of the irony. Harry had grown up enduring whispers that James Hewitt was his real father. For decades, he'd fought to prove he was truly Charles's son. And now, cruelly, the same shadow had fallen on Archie. History repeating itself, not as tragedy, but as humiliation. And the royals knew it. William, stoic, kept his distance but privately seethed at the damage to the family's reputation. Kate, ever protective of her children, worried about the impact on George, Charlotte, and Louis. Even Anne, hardened and pragmatic, was said to have muttered in private that Harry had brought this chaos upon himself. But the most chilling reaction came from Charles. Not rage, not panic, just cold calculation. If Archie was not Harry's son, then Archie was no royal at all. No title, no place in the line of succession, no claim to the future of the crown. For Charles, it was not just a personal betrayal. It was a constitutional crisis. The speculation, however, refused to be contained within palace walls. Journalists began circling, their pens sharp, their questions sharper. Old acquaintances of Meghan's were tracked down in Toronto, Los Angeles, and London. Former colleagues were asked about her relationships, her secrets, her habits. Paparazzi zoomed lenses on every outing with Archie, scrutinizing every expression, every gesture, every resemblance. And then came the cruelest twist. For some, the question of Archie's paternity was no longer about identifying his father. It was about discrediting Meghan entirely. Theories of surrogacy resurfaced. Questions about whether Meghan had carried Archie at all. Wild claims, unfounded yet unstoppable, spread like poison across forums, podcasts, and gossip columns. Harry was trapped in a nightmare. The son he adored was now the subject of global suspicion. The wife he defended with every ounce of his being was now accused of the ultimate betrayal. And the family he had abandoned in search of freedom was now watching, silent, as his world collapsed around him. But the speculation didn't just haunt Harry and Meghan. It terrified the royals. Because if the true father's identity ever surfaced, and if it was someone the public already knew, it would be the single greatest scandal to strike the monarchy in living memory. And Tom Bower, relentless as ever, hinted that he was closing in on that name, that he had sources, evidence, connections pointing toward a man whose existence in Meghan's story could not be erased. Which leads us to the next chilling question. Who was he? Who was the man that Meghan's whispers of the past refused to silence? Because once his name was spoken aloud, the scandal would not just engulf Meghan and Harry, it would consume the monarchy itself. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Hollywood. Glitz, glamour, and secrets hidden beneath the glow of the spotlight. Before Meghan Markle was the Duchess of Sussex, before she was Harry's wife, she was Meghan the actress. Meghan the hustler. Meghan navigating the shark-infested waters of Los Angeles and Toronto, building a career brick by brick while surrounding herself with powerful connections. And it's in that past, her Hollywood years, that whispers of Archie's true paternity began to take root. For Meghan, Hollywood wasn't just a career. It was survival. Auditions, late-night parties, networking events that often blurred the line between professional and personal. She was charming, magnetic, and, according to those who knew her, highly ambitious. Meghan knew that in Hollywood, proximity to the right people could change everything. And so she built a circle, a tight-knit group of friends, mentors, and benefactors who would later play starring roles in the whispers about Archie's birth. Let's start with Toronto, where Meghan lived while filming Suits. Here, she forged friendships that would carry her into royal life. Jessica Mulroney, Marcus Anderson, and a cluster of elite socialites. These names weren't random. They were powerful figures with influence stretching from fashion houses to political circles. But they were also the names whispered when questions about Archie's paternity surfaced. Marcus Anderson, for example, was no ordinary friend. He worked for Soho House, the exclusive members-only club where celebrities, politicians, and royals mingled away from prying eyes. Marcus was known as a connector, someone who could introduce you to anyone, open doors you didn't even know existed. Meghan leaned heavily on Marcus when she was establishing herself in Toronto. He was by her side at parties, in photos, in whispers. And when Meghan introduced Harry to Soho House, guess who facilitated the meetings? Marcus. Insiders began to wonder, was Marcus just a friend? Or did his closeness to Meghan extend into more personal territory? Did their bond play a role in the questions surrounding Archie? After all, Marcus's influence was undeniable. His name surfaced in quiet conversations among palace aides who wanted to know why Meghan clung to him so fiercely. Could he have been more than a confidant? Then there was Jessica Mulroney, Meghan's so-called best friend and unofficial stylist. Jessica was older, well-connected, married into Canada's most famous political dynasty. Her access to power and wealth was unquestionable, but her loyalty to Meghan was what made her dangerous. Jessica knew Meghan's past inside and out. The boyfriends, the flings, the choices Meghan preferred the world forget. If anyone knew the truth about Archie's father, Jessica was a prime candidate. Some even suggested she had facilitated introductions Meghan wanted hidden. And then came the men from Meghan's romantic past. Trevor Engelson, her ex-husband, a Hollywood producer who had once built her career from the ground up. Their divorce was messy, abrupt, and left Trevor bitter. But his proximity to Meghan during her prime Hollywood years made him an unavoidable name when whispers of Archie's paternity spread. Was Trevor truly in the past? Or had unfinished ties lingered into the present? Then there were others, directors, fellow actors, unnamed industry figures, men who crossed Meghan's orbit during years of relentless ambition. Every photograph, every unexplained trip, every social connection was scrutinized once the DNA rumors broke, and each one became a potential candidate in the cruel game of speculation. Harry, meanwhile, was caught in the crossfire of these whispers. Imagine the torment. Every time he looked at Archie, he saw Meghan's Hollywood years staring back at him. Every headline suggesting another name. Every whispered rumor about Marcus, Trevor, or unnamed figures. It was poison seeping into his marriage. Did Meghan know all along who Archie's father truly was? Was Harry chosen not as a husband, but as a shield? A prince whose title could protect her from scrutiny and give her child a royal identity? The thought drove Harry to despair. He had once seen Meghan as his escape, his freedom from the gilded cage of monarchy. But now, the possibility loomed that she had seen him as nothing more than a means to an end. But here's where things take an even darker turn. Tom Bower, relentless in his pursuit of the truth, hinted that his sources had narrowed the speculation to one particular candidate. Not Trevor, not just Marcus, but someone whose connection to Meghan stretched beyond friendship into something deeper, something the royals themselves had whispered about, but never dared to confront. And that's when the name began to circle behind palace doors. A name that fit too neatly, that raised too many questions. A man whose proximity to Meghan overlapped with timelines, whose presence in her life was too persistent to dismiss. Insiders claimed that staff, journalists, and even estranged members of Meghan's own family began pointing to the same figure. His identity wasn't shouted from rooftops, not yet, but it lingered like smoke from a hidden fire, impossible to ignore. The royals were terrified, because if this man truly was Archie's father, if Bower dared to print his name, the monarchy wouldn't just be embarrassed, it would be engulfed in scandal unlike anything it had endured in centuries. For Harry, the whispers were unbearable. The more they swirled, the more he unraveled. His trust in Meghan frayed, his loyalty clashed with his gnawing doubts. Could he confront her? Could he ask her directly if Archie was truly his? Or was the truth too dangerous, too devastating to even put into words? And Meghan, how did she respond? By doubling down, by insisting the whispers were lies, fueled by racism, sexism, and hatred, by attacking the press, by silencing staff, by projecting calm and control in public even as panic allegedly simmered in private. Her past, once an asset she spun to her advantage, had become a weapon aimed directly at her. And so the question remained, who was he? Who was the man insiders whispered about in hushed tones, the one name that Meghan could never scrub from her history? Tom Bower claimed he knew, or at least, that his sources were circling the truth. And if he ever spoke that name aloud, Meghan's carefully built empire, and Harry's already fragile world, would come crashing down in an instant. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The morning was unremarkable, at least on the surface. The sun rose over Frogmore Cottage, spilling golden light across the manicured lawns, birds chirping as if nothing could ever disturb the fragile calm of royal life. But inside, chaos was brewing. Prince Harry sat in the small study, the familiar scent of leather-bound books and polished wood doing nothing to soothe the storm in his mind. He had done it. He had taken the test. A private, discreet DNA test arranged months ago, under conditions so confidential that only a handful of trusted aides knew it existed. And yet, the results, now sealed in an envelope on the desk before him, had the power to unravel everything he thought he knew about his life, his marriage, and his son. Harry's hand trembled as he reached for the envelope. He hesitated, knowing that once he opened it, there would be no turning back. This wasn't just about trust or betrayal. It was about identity, about the very bloodline that had connected him to the child he had adored from the moment Meghan announced her pregnancy. About the reality that, if true, could sever that connection in a way that no royal protocol or ceremony could ever repair. Why did he doubt himself? Why had he agreed to this, even at the insistence of Charles, who had never been subtle in his skepticism? Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps fear. Perhaps it was a mixture of both. Charles, always strategic, had suggested the test under the guise of transparency, a moment of clarity in the haze of speculation. But Harry, intuitively suspicious, had known there was more to it, a deeper reason why his father insisted on knowing, why secrecy was paramount, why even the staff were kept in the dark. He tore open the envelope. The paper inside bore a simple, clinical layout, numbers and letters representing genetic markers, a sterile format for what was, for Harry, the most explosive revelation imaginable. He scanned the data, trying to focus on the scientific terms, the combinations that meant something precise and immutable. But as his eyes processed the results, comprehension collided with disbelief. The markers didn't match. Not even close. Harry blinked, reread the lines, hoping for some clerical error, some anomaly in the laboratory process. But the numbers confirmed the unthinkable. The child he had held, kissed, loved, Archie Harrison, was not biologically his. The room seemed to tilt. The walls closed in. For a moment, Harry felt as though he were falling into an abyss. The words, "not his child," echoed, a relentless, merciless drumbeat in his mind. He thought of Meghan. Could she have hidden this from him? Could she have known, and chosen to let him believe otherwise? The betrayal cut deeper than any palace feud, deeper than the media scrutiny, deeper even than the public scandals he had endured. This was personal. This was intimacy weaponized. And yet, the reality was layered. It wasn't just Meghan. This revelation implicated a network of people, whisperers, friends, advisors, and yes, even his own father. Charles had wanted him to know. Why? Was it manipulation? Control? Or was it a painful attempt at preparing Harry for a truth that could no longer be contained? Harry's mind raced. Who could the biological father be? Was it someone from Meghan's past? One of the Hollywood connections long whispered about? Or was it someone entirely unexpected, someone whose proximity to the royal family added another dimension of danger and intrigue? Every theory seemed more outrageous than the last, yet the DNA didn't lie. Bower's book had hinted at this. The whispers, the rumors, the secret sources he referenced. It all began to converge into a picture Harry had never wanted to see. Bower had claimed knowledge of the truth, had meticulously tracked Meghan's history, her social connections, her private liaisons. And now, Harry faced the living reality of those claims. The weight of secrecy was suffocating. If the wrong person knew, if the press got even a whisper, the ramifications would be catastrophic. The monarchy itself could face unprecedented scrutiny. Every headline, every interview, every royal tradition would be dissected, mocked, and debated worldwide. Harry realized that this knowledge, while devastating, was also a weapon. A weapon that, if wielded carelessly, could annihilate his family, his reputation, and even the delicate life of Archie himself. And yet, the need for action gnawed at him. Should he confront Meghan? Should he demand answers, explanations, or confessions? Or should he bury the truth, preserving the illusion for the sake of public stability and private sanity? He thought of Archie's smile, the innocent laughter, the tiny hands that reached for him without question or doubt. How could he reconcile the love he felt for his son with the knowledge that the biological connection wasn't real? Would it change anything at all, or would it only magnify the fracture between him and Meghan? Outside, the sun climbed higher, indifferent to the turbulence inside Frogmore Cottage. Harry rose from the chair, pacing, trying to find clarity in motion. The palace had always demanded composure, a stoic mask in the face of chaos. But this was beyond protocol, beyond tradition, beyond anything a prince was supposed to endure. And then came a knock at the door. An aide entered, subtle, hesitant, as though they knew the storm brewing within Harry. "Sir, there's someone here to see you," they said, voice low. "It's about the book. Tom Bower. He has new material. He insists it's verified. He says it's crucial." Harry froze. His mind spun. The DNA revelation had already shattered his private world, and now Bower's sources were apparently pointing toward specifics: the name, the connections, the timing. The theory that had once been a whisper, a shadow in the palace corridors, was about to take form. He faced a choice: confront the truth publicly, risking an international scandal, or keep it buried, living with a secret that threatened to destroy everything he held dear. The prince took a deep breath, knowing that the next decision would define not just his legacy, but the very life of the boy he had always believed to be his own. And then